He says, if the king believes that he can set aside a law made by the Virginia legislature, then he is now a tyrant.
You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host, Mike Lovett.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to That Podcast in the Sky, And If Love Remains. And this is your sometimes virtuous, occasionally vile, always virile host, Mike Levitt. Welcome to And If Love Remains. We have with us the Teacher of Liberty. Again, great friend of the program. Love having him on anytime. He is always welcome. Joe Wolverton, welcome back.
Thank you, sir. It's an honor to serve.
Well, it's an honor to have you. It's wonderful, and we're coming up on some Independence Day festivities for many, and I wanted to have you on to talk about who. While everybody knows his name and everybody knows a few things, maybe a few words that he said, in my opinion, maybe one of the most underrated founding fathers that we have, and that is Patrick Henry. I came across your article. It's a great article. We'll link it in the description that you wrote a few years ago for the 10th. I think it was for the 10th Amendment Center, or at least that's where I found it. And it was just a wonderful article going through what a powerful dude this was, and specifically talking about the Stamp Act and his role in that.
Right.
But I wanted to kind of get your flavor. I know he's one of your heroes. Tell us a little bit about Patrick Henry and why you think he's just an amazing guy, somebody we should revere today.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of reasons that I feel sort of a kinship with him. One of the things is that during his own lifetime, a lot of people discounted his erudition, his intellect, because he had a country accent. Now, my living overseas for most of my life, it removed my native accent from me. But like my family being from Memphis and they all have a strong Southern accent. And growing up, and anytime you watch TV, you see if someone's dumb, just give them a Southern accent. And so Patrick Henry, being from the backwoods, he had an accent, and people would comment on it, and it would cause people to say, oh, this guy is in over his head being a lawyer. He's in over his head in the Virginia House of Burgesses and all of this, and mock him and stuff. And he just shook it off. He basically just forged ahead, and so that's one like personal thing. I think good he overcame that, because it's still stigmatizing, which is bizarre that it's stigmatizing, but it is. If you have a Southern accent, you're an idiot, And so I like that he was able to overcome that. He was one of people don't know, this was a young guy when he made his bones, so to speak. He became a name that people knew because of the case known as the Parsons Cause. He was 27 years old. And well, let's back up. Before we get to Parsons Cause, I just realized, I'm sitting here saying how he became, and that's what people know. Patrick Henry, even though you're right, he is unheralded for the most part, except for Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death, which is wonderful. But the thing about Patrick Henry is he failed so many times in life. He wasn't born wealthy. He got married. He was 18. His wife was 16. She had a little bit of a farm as a dowry, and he decided he went into when he turned 18. He goes into business with his brother, opens a general store, fails. He gets married, has this farm. He's like, okay, I'm gonna be a farmer. The house burns down, fails. He decides, okay, I'm going to try to open a store again, opens a store again, and fails. Goes completely out of business. And time and again, this guy is failing at things that he puts his all into. And I think a very no, not I think, a very important element of the stories of some of these most noteworthy and renowned people is the untold story of their failures, because we see him as Patrick Henry and we think, famous founding father, probably think wealthy, but you don't think of the kid who puts everything into opening a store with his brother and can't make a dime, who puts everything into being a farmer, house burns down. I mean, can you and even just saying it, house burns down. Okay, he's on to dude, your house burnt down. It's a big deal. And for him to be able to bounce back, the resilience of this guy, if nothing else, how at 20 years old do you have, the fortitude to bounce back and say, okay, I'm going to try this. And so finally, he goes to work at his father in law's tavern. I mean, he's like, I can't do anything right. Nothing I do is successful. So his father-in-law is like, well, I have a bar. You can come work there. And he's like, swell. So he goes to work at the bar and he quickly finds out this is not the life that I want. So he's like, I want to become a lawyer. Well, it's different then and now, obviously, but he can't afford to hire someone or to be an apprentice to someone. He has to work all the time to support his new wife and everything, and it's not like, you don't want to look bad in front of your father-in-law. So
Right.
he has to take his time off and read law books, Blackstone and uh, Cook and people like that. And he has to do it on his own time. And then he decides, okay, at 24 years old, he's like, all right, I'm gonna try to I'm gonna try to pass the bar. So back then, you would make an appointment with the state bar, right? Not bar association like now, but you would make an appointment with people that were selected to be the people who decided whether or not you could be a lawyer in that state. So as it turns out, you've got on the board sitting for Patrick Henry, you've got George Wythe, who is probably the smartest guy in Virginia, certainly one of the most well respected, a guy who learned English, Latin, and Greek at the same time. He's a genius. And here Patrick Henry is like, oh boy. But he goes and you just stand there and they just pepper you with questions from Blackstone, from Cook, from all sorts of things like that. And he passed the bar and, he says remarkably, he's like, I really don't know how, but it's because they saw in him this guy that really had what it took.
Well,
He was made to be a lawyer. I mean,
and he was a like remarkably smart guy. I,
yeah,
I
that's
remember there's if I remember the stories right, there his mother when he was young would take him to these church camps, these kind of um, evangelical church meetings, and on the way back would have him recite back the all of the all of the preaching that was done for the day. And so obviously he was taught at home, he was taught well, he was taught um, you know properly, and he had a fertile mind for that.
yeah, he went to school for a couple of years, like went to not like school today, but school then. He went to school for a couple of years, but then his dad homeschooled him the rest of his life. I mean, as far as till he became an adult. But yeah, he had a remarkable mind. And that's, there was a recent biography called Patrick Henry, The Mind of a Patriot, which even the author says, I'm here to sort of rehabilitate the idea, the genius and the intellect and the erudition. He was well read. I mean, you go and look at his library, and he has. I don't know, like, Founder's Recipe. So, like, I went and I looked at his library, Patrick Henry's library. He has 11 of those guys in his library,
Right.
and we're not talking like John Locke, but we're talking, Grotius, Pufendorf, Trench and Gordon, of course, people like that. He Devado, he had in his library. These are things that he read, and he was a really brilliant guy. And so then, as a lawyer, man, once he found the thing that suited his talent, it reminds me of William Wirt was one of his early biographers,
Okay.
and William Wirt is talking about how Patrick Henry was speaking for 4 hours, standing on his feet, speaking for 4 hours without notes. And he writes in his biography, talking about Patrick Henry, he could talk. God's how he could talk, you know, and he could just stand there. And it's one of those things, if you can't sell the steaks, sell the sizzle. And he could sell some steak and some sizzle. This guy, 4 hours, and that's what he was good at. And so then you get to Parsons Cause, where and this is the thing people don't realize, if you'd ask somebody who's sort of it's even like, I think it's a moniker that you can look up, and I bet if you Googled it, you would get one answer. Like, the father of the American Revolution, it's Samuel Adams. 9 times out of 10, it's Samuel Adams. But this guy, he, at the Parsons case, I don't know if you want to talk about that or not, the Parsons.
We could talk about it. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think it's an important case.
well, it is Parsons Cause. So basically what happened is there was an established church. The Church of England was the official church of Virginia, and the preachers would get paid in tobacco, right? So it was a tax. You would get taxed so much, so many pounds of tobacco to pay the preachers. That's what established religion means. It means the government taxes you and takes that amount of tax and pays the clergy. And so it was tobacco that they would get paid. Well, the price of tobacco, they have a drought, and the price of tobacco goes crazy. And so they end up getting this 2 pounds, or I can't remember, I think it was 2 pounds. That 2 pounds goes from being worth, let's just say for discussion, $2 to being worth $20. And Patrick Henry, and so the Virginia legislature says, no, we're capping the price that we pay the clergy. Well, some of the clergy get upset. They notify their colonial agent in London, and the king vetoes Virginia's bill, saying we're capping the amount that we're going to pay these clergymen. And the king says, no, you're not going to do that. And so one of the clergymen, he was a Baptist clergy. This is what people don't get. They were in Virginia, where if you go to Virginia today and not Northern Virginia, not Northern Virginia, but the real Virginia. If you go to real Virginia today and you throw a rock, you're going to hit 20 Baptists, right?
Yeah.
But back then, they were putting Baptists in jail for preaching and for, just challenging the established church. So anyway, this Baptist preacher, he challenges that these guys are getting money while we're growing broke, because he's like, I'm a preacher, but I'm also a farmer. This guy is nothing but a preacher, and here I am going broke because of this drought, but still having to pay this guy. Well, Patrick Henry goes in, defends the guy, or is the lawyer for Mr. Murray, and he says, if the king believes that he can set aside a law made by the Virginia legislature, then he is now a tyrant. And at that moment, people in the courtroom were like, oh, like, you don't do that.
Including his father.
Right. His dad, the other attorney, they were like, treason, like, this guy just, and the other attorney says, objection. Are you not going to censure him for treason? And the judge is like, overruled.
If I remember right, wasn't the judge his father? I
The
think
judge in the Parsons cause?
I think he was. I think he was because he was like the state, the head of the state judiciary or something
You
like
might
that.
be right. I don't know. I'll have to look. Now that you say that, I don't remember reading. I don't remember that off the top of my head. You'd think I would, but I don't remember. But anyway, the point is he wasn't censured, and so there he was calling the king a tyrant, which at that time was really, because we're talking, this is 2 years before the Stamp Act speech,
Right.
which is
Which is a
10
biggie.
years before the give me liberty or give me death speech.
Right.
And so this is 12 years before the give me liberty or give me death speech. And so calling the king a tyrant was really unheard of. And so even though Samuel Adams rightfully gets a lot of credit, Patrick Henry was on the cutting edge of saying, there's no, we have, you don't have the authority to negate laws that we make for ourselves. And that propelled it, because not only I mean, they only awarded a minor recompense, but the point is, he gained his reputation not only as someone that was an able lawyer, but someone who was fearless. And that just propelled him to success as an attorney, but also to what they would call, continental notoriety for being someone who's like calling the king a tyrant.
Yeah, I think it's. Um, I don't want to compare the two intellectually or anything like that, but just as like a visionary, somebody who can like say something and have it come to pass in the future. I mean, he's a kind of almost like a Alex Jones figure from a standpoint of like, man, you could see that like he saw that this one little thing would lead down the road. Like there's the slippery slope. This is going to lead to tyranny, and the fact that he's willing to do this, it means he's willing to step over the line on anything.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Patrick Henry. He didn't have the education that Thomas Jefferson or James Madison had. He didn't have that education. He didn't go to college. He didn't go to law school. He didn't do any of that. But he made that famous statement in the "Give Me Liberty, Give Me Death," when he says, "I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that's the lamp of experience." And he's saying, "My study of history reveals to me that." And so, when you get to the Virginia Ratifying Convention in 1788, anybody who hasn't read that, you just don't get it, because you have a real clash of the Titans. You have Patrick Henry versus James Madison.
Right.
Now, I'm going to give the intellectual edge to Madison, but I'm going to give the oratorical edge to Henry. But here are these two guys, Patrick Henry saying this Constitution is a tyranny in embryo. It's going to swallow up the liberty of the state. It's going to touch everything dear to human existence. And you've got James Madison saying, "You're loco. There's none of this. It's a limited government," on and on. But the point is,
Who is the
you have
prophet?
you have these two. Well, James Madison's problem would be a good problem to have, but James Madison's
Yeah.
thing is he really did believe that the rest of us were like him, and that's just not true. But
Right.
uh, but Virginia, there would be, it's one of those things, alternative history, because there were 10 votes separating. It was 89 to 79 in favor of ratifying the Constitution, but only because Madison was able to convince some of the people there, okay, fine, we will have a Bill of Rights. We will, in the first if you ratify and join the Union during the first Congress, I will introduce a Bill of Rights. When he promised that, the power, and that's the thing, the power of Madison's virtue is what ended up swaying Virginia in favor of the Constitution, because rhetorically, if you read them, and you can read them free online, like all of this stuff, if you read Patrick Henry, it's like, whoa, this dude was nailing it, you know. And Madison was saying what he knew to be true because he was sitting in the room. But if you're looking at prophetically who had the most foresight, it doesn't. Patrick Henry was nailing it, and had it not been for the fact that James Madison was so trustworthy, so respected, that his word was, if he said, I'm going to do this, he's going to do it. Even in letters, Madison would say, I don't want to do this, but I have to because I told them I would. But anyway, Patrick Henry and James Madison, that just started a long history of fighting between the
Yeah.
two of them.
Wow. Well, I don't want to jump over though the Stamp Act,
Oh,
because
no.
man, that thing is so dang powerful. And what I didn't realize until I did a little research is how um, that Patrick Henry was the one that wrote the um, the Stamp Act revisions. Like, he was the one that made these proposals that
Yeah.
basically said this is BS. There's no way, and each one got harsher and harsher. Um, Talk a little bit about the Stamp Act, and it's. I mean, I think we learn it kind of in school, like, oh yeah, the British were,
Mhm.
putting a stamp on all official documents, or anything that they could to tax it and get money, and basically to try to get money back from the French Indian War. But can you talk about how the Americans, because that's the part I don't think we ever get, is how the Americans felt about the Stamp Act.
Well, it was roundly rejected by the colonists because it represented an attempt to raise revenue using taxation, where taxation, since the days of Alfred the Great, was used only in times of war when the realm was being threatened. The king would be authorized to tax his subjects to protect them, which makes sense. And they would do it voluntarily
Right.
because, yes, we need to be
There was a
protected.
threat.
Right. Well, the hubris of England wanting to just continually humiliate its arch enemy France, and they run up a debt. They double their national debt in an effort to perpetuate this war against France. And then they say, well, why don't we've got a cash cow over in America. And one of the things they pass is this Stamp Act. And if you read the parliamentary record of it, so many parliamentarians, members of parliament, were like, no, this is not right, and it's not going to work. And you have someone like Isaac Barry, which is a name nobody knows, and every American should know the name Isaac Barry. Here he was, a member of parliament in England, saying, this is tyrannical, this will never work, this is unconstitutional, it violates Magna Carta, and he goes on and on, Isaac Barry does. And anyway, so the Americans roundly hated it. But something that people don't realize, Mike, is that we live the Stamp Act today. Because basically what the Stamp Act was, it wasn't, I think people get it in their head that it meant that you got a little stamp like on stuff that you bought, and that's not what it was. It was, you got a little stamp, like think of a postage stamp. You would go and you would get a little stamp, and that would prove that you bought whatever it is you bought it from an approved vendor, you bought it with the approved currency, and um you had a stamp to prove that you did. So we call it a receipt, but honestly it's the Stamp Act because you buy from a business who has a business license given from the king. You use the dollars approved by the king, and you get a little piece of paper saying that you complied with the law.
That you could submit in your taxes to the king's
Precisely.
tax,
And we
collector.
live, that's no more or less than the Stamp Act. And what's it for? To raise revenue. But nobody cares, right? It's a historical thing we talk about, and that's the thing, school is good at. Isolate this so no one thinks, ridicule it so no one thinks that, hey, wait a minute, right? Because I can't go out here in the front of my house, and I can't start selling things without the police showing up. Where's your license to sell? I don't have one. Then you're shut down because of the Stamp Act that we live under. But anyway,
That's
Patrick
a beautiful
Henry.
point. Thank you for bringing that forward, man.
Well, yeah, but it's true and nobody
Yeah,
recognizes it. But anyway, so Patrick Henry, yeah, he writes what end up being called the Stamp Act Resolves or the Virginia Resolves. He writes 7 of them, and 5 of them get approved by the House of Burgesses. And then he goes home. He's pretty happy. He's riding home. He gets on his horse. He's leaving Williamsburg. They voted, and he's very happy that 5 of the 7 got put through. He goes home, comes back, and finds out that while he was gone, they rescinded the 5th one, which the 5th one was the most powerful one. The 5th resolve that ended up not getting approved, getting approved and then rescinded, said that only Virginia can tax Virginians, that no tax imposed by anybody whatsoever except the Virginia legislature was valid, right? And so that they were like really afraid that that's going too far because that might invoke the ire. But the fact is, you could tell the tone, man, because Patrick Henry in that Stamp Act speech, you know, he's just going off. And they said you could hear him. It started a thunderstorm, and you could hear him over the thunder. And you can go to that church, St. John's Church, where he delivered it. And he's sitting here just going off. And he says, see,
I think I have
Caesar.
that quote.
He says, Tarquin had his Brutus.
Yeah,
Tarquin had his Brutus. Charles the First had his Cromwell, and George the Third had better learn from their example. And basically, everybody starts calling treason, like literally just screaming out treason. Because basically, what he was saying is, if George the Third wants to act like a tyrant, we'll treat him like a tyrant and kill him. Because that's what happened to Tarquin. Well, Tarquin didn't get killed, but that's what Caesar ultimately also had Brutus, Julius Caesar. So you had, and the idea being Charles the First was beheaded, Julius Caesar was stabbed, Tarquin was run out of town, and George the Third, the same will happen to you. But he was interrupted, and finally he just said, had better learn from their example. And dude, that just, you can tell the tone because everybody in there is like, oh, no, he didn't.
right.
Because he's
Well,
basically saying, we will treat you like a tyrant if you're going to act like one.
and then my favorite line from that is when he says, "If this be treason, make the most of it."
Yeah, because they start screaming treason. And he's like, well, if this is treason, make the most of it. Here
Let's
I
do
am.
it.
Come get me. And that, again, that propelled him to, because the Virginia Resolves got passed around the colonies. And they were like, whoa, Patrick Henry, dude. And so you've got people like the Sons of Liberty up north. And then all over, Sons of Liberty chapters, form all over the colonies. And you've got them saying, well, this dude is definitely the front line of the armed resistance to tyranny, the movement that was growing to have to expect armed resistance, right? To expect there to be some need of a militia response to a British force being sent over to enforce the law.
Yeah, that That's powerful stuff, man. I mean, and again, this is 10 full years before, um, the Declaration. This is like, obviously things are heating up, but this is still like, this is a guy who can see the writing on the walls.
Yeah, this is 10 years before the shot heard around the world, 10 years before Lexington and Concord. And he's just like, you're going to act like this is the thing, man. We just need Patrick Henrys today because it's one of those things. If this be treason, make the most of it. Nobody has, I mean, even you look at everybody in Congress and everybody, even the most, liberty loving guys, when there comes a point and they're like backing off a notch, you know, and we need Patrick Henry. We need to, and I don't think in Congress we need him because Patrick Henry, he did actually serve in the Continental Congress, both Continental Congresses, in fact, the first and the second Continental Congress. And a thing about Patrick Henry, also not known, is Patrick Henry went back to Virginia and he formed his own militia
Right.
because, of course, that was perfectly legal, and not only legal, it was expected.
It was, yeah.
And so he just went back home and he's like, okay, let's get a bunch of guys, let's form a militia. And actually, Virginia chose Patrick Henry to be the commander in chief of all the militias of Virginia. And, maybe not the best choice because he wasn't a soldier.
Right. That wasn't his calling.
That wasn't that was not the reason God put him on the earth, to be a soldier. And they ended up recognizing that. And it ended up being where I think one of the most important moments of his life, honestly. I mean, everybody knows the big ones, but the moment when the Virginia legislature says to Patrick Henry, we're relieving you of your command, we're placing you subordinate, we're making you a colonel, and we're making you subordinate to some of the guys who were your subordinates. And Patrick Henry's militia, the guys that he had gathered to form militia, they said, well, then we're leaving. If you're doing this to our guy, we're gone. Good luck without us. And Patrick Henry addressed them and said, this is bigger than me. You guys submit to this because this is bigger than me, than my reputation. Please submit to this new organization. And they do. And so I think that's one of the biggest, that's a humility that we don't see in politicians.
Yeah.
And him to say, this is bigger than me. I don't care that I'm colonel instead of general or whatever. He's like, y'all stay with the militia and keep doing what we're doing. And that's a signal moment in the life of a man who had many signal moments.
Yeah, for sure. And it is interesting. Like, it does make you think about the crop of people that were in Virginia at that time, because you can make the case like that humility was in George Washington. That humility, maybe not as much, but a certain amount, certainly in Thomas Jefferson. He always came across to me as a little bit of a hoity-toity.
Jefferson?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Jefferson, yeah, I don't know if humility, I don't know if that's a word I would stick with Tom,
Okay.
but that's fine. I mean, the guy had he could back up what he claimed.
Right.
It's, I always tell people, if you want to know the difference between Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, look at their graves. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote out in his will exactly what his grave, his monument headstone should look like, and you can go see it today. It's a list of all his accomplishments. Whereas if you go over and you look at James Madison's grave, it's literally like about a 4-foot headstone that says Madison. That's literally it.
Wow.
That's all you need to know about those two guys, right? And James Madison, they were begging him to write an autobiography, and he writes, well, I think it was 18 pages. He's like, that's all I can think that I've done.
That's all I've done.
Yeah, that's about it. But there was that crop of people. I mean, George Wythe,
Yeah.
St. George Tucker, John Taylor of Caroline, yeah, just so many, just that crop of James Monroe, that crop of guys in Virginia that really just, whew, they were all sent in the same generation for obvious reason.
Yeah,
It's one of those
absolutely.
things. It's like that's no coincidence.
Yeah. Well, let's move, because in my mind I kind of think of, and I know there's a lot of preparatory stuff, but when I'm in my mind when I think of Patrick Henry, I think of kind of the three biggies, which is the Stamp Act, the Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death, and then his arguments against the Constitution as kind
Right.
of like the big
Hmm.
kind of
Right.
philosophical ideas that he brings to the table. So
Right.
let's move ahead a little bit and talk a little bit about the revolution and his role, because he was the guy, he was the Winston Churchill of like riling people up, and this is an important thing, and but that famous speech, the "Give Me Liberty, Give Me Death" speech. Talk a little bit about going up to that and that speech specifically.
Yeah, well, that's the speech given after the shot heard around the world. So you have, it's uh shot heard around the world was April 19th, and Patrick Henry, there were, Virginia, all of the colonies were like, okay, what does this mean for us? If we've got the British Army shooting citizens of Massachusetts, if we've got the British Army shutting down the legislature of Massachusetts, seizing the weapons from, what does this mean for all of us? And so you had these different factions, and don't get the idea of political parties that did not exist, but you had these sort of moving factions of people who were at different levels of how do we respond to
Right.
this
These
when
Englishmen,
as
right?
Englishmen, right? And but as Virginia is not exactly next door to Massachusetts, and
Yeah.
so they're like, how do we respond? And so you had a lot of people saying, just calm down. It's an isolated case. This happened. It's isolated. Let's just send a petition. Let's tell the king and parliament we're not happy about this, and everything. And Patrick Henry just got up and said, this is ridiculous. He's like, you call for peace, but the war already started. He's like, that's great that you're saying let's have peace, but it's too late because there are dead people in Massachusetts today. There are British regulars who have killed Massachusetts men, as he called them. They're dead because they were shot by the British Army. So there's no such thing as peace anymore with regard to this. And he's like, if you're so interested in peace, why do you send warships? Send ambassadors, don't send soldiers. And he said, the fact is, this gale, this wind is blowing across the colonies. And what happens in Massachusetts will happen here. We need to prepare for it. We need to get our militia squared away, ready to go, because it is this gale of despotism that's blowing across. And England has demonstrated that even the king has no desire to treat us as Englishmen, to treat us constitutionally, right? Because you had the Magna Carta, you had the Petition of Rights, you had the Bill of Rights, all part of the English Constitution. And he's like, he has violated all that. Parliament has. So we need to be ready. And he's like, because at the end of the day, and it's the famous, climax of the speech. I don't know what path others will take, but as for me, and obviously quoting from what was Joshua, right? If the Lord be God, then worship Him, and I know not what course other, but give if the Lord be God, worship me. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And so he quotes that essentially saying, but for me, give me liberty or give me death, and just powerful. And that was his, you know, The thing about Patrick Henry is he wasn't doing any of this for show. This is who he was. That is why his genuine passion is what made him who he is. He wasn't doing it for ratings, for likes, for clicks, for votes. He simply meant what he said and was persuasive in his ability to just extemporaneously explain and encapsulate history and its effect on our day, on his own day. And of course, the same thing when he says, "Give me the," people are shouting, "That's treason." You're saying that the king is taking our liberty, and he's like, "But he is
Right.
right now." He's forging chains right now. You can hear the clanging of him forging the chains for you, but here you are meekly saying, "Well, let's just calm down. Let's send a tersely worded letter."
To
Right?
sanction him.
Yeah, and so it's like it's the equivalent of today. Well, let's make a video and put it on Facebook and TikTok and everything. Let's make a video telling everyone how tyrannical this or that is. But show me the member of Congress that gets up and says, "Yeah, this is all tyrannical. None of this is constitutional." We're to, calling a spade a spade. You just don't have it. And people say, "Oh, it's so different. It's because today they can arrest you." That they arrested people back then. I mean, anybody who thinks that there's any difference in the regime's response now and then, go and read of the prison ships that they would put any captured American on a British prison ship for months and months, with the idea being, "Oh, we're going to take them to England to try them." No, that was simply torture,
Torture.
right? And naked, chained to a wall, no bathroom, no, they would throw food down the hatch at you, stuff like that. That stuff happened back then, but back then they were like, "Yeah, so they treated the savior like this. Why am I better than he is?" But today we're like, no, if you go to jail, then you can't get a job later. What good have you done? Stuff like that.
Right.
Seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I mean, you make a lot of good points, but one thing I want to just emphasize a little bit is it could have gone a lot of different ways. I mean, you could come up with a reasonable counter history where the maybe the South's divided at that time, and create some treaty with England, or it supports England in some way. And because you're right, these were not like a unibody of it wasn't one nation. An
No.
attack against Massachusetts did not mean an attack against Virginia. And
Right.
so you can make that, but I think it took a foresight of somebody like Patrick Henry to say, wait a sec, a snake's a snake. This guy, he's going to do to us what he did to them, just like what you said, and we need to support this cause, because it will happen to us. It will come to us.
Yeah. I mean, it's much like I remember after 9/11, and I would say to people, I'm like, Great. First of all, we don't know what happened, but let's put that aside. Let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that the official story is true, which obviously it is not, but
Right.
let's pretend it is. Well, all this invective against Muslims is going to be turned on Christians. You will see the day come that Christianity will be, reading the Bible at home will be a reason for a CPS visit. And don't say you weren't warned when, as the world becomes more secular and more wicked and more just completely irrational, prepare for whatever you sanction against some other religion will come back and be used against you when it is politically convenient.
Right.
And it will someday be politically convenient to harass and oppress Christians. And it's like, you need to stand today and realize that. And so Patrick Henry was like, many of you are like to say, well, it's so far away. That's never coming here. We can avoid that. In fact, we can draw a line and say, hey, we didn't, we're not shooting at soldiers, and we're not, you know, throwing tea in the harbor, and we're not doing this, that, and the other. And Patrick Henry's like, they don't care.
Right.
At the end of the day, it isn't about the tea in the harbor. It's about, there is money there. We they came to believe, the king and parliament, or not all of parliament, but most of it came to believe, as our colony, they owe us money for protecting them, which is not true. Americans fought in what we call the French and Indian War. Americans fought in that. What are you just going to sit there and be like, I don't know what's going? Of course, you're going to join your town's militia, and
That's
you're an
right.
Englishman, and you're going to fight as an Englishman. And so, I mean, George Washington. That's the thing. They
Because you're
had a
fighting for you're not, I mean, you're not necessarily, you're fighting, quote, for the crown, but it's really, you're fighting for your village. You're fighting for
Yeah,
your town. You're
exactly. You're
fighting for
fighting
your
for your
family.
family, exactly. And so that was a good narrative, a good little tale to spin to convince people, yeah, they do owe us money, and there's no sense of these colonists getting wealthy when we have a huge debt to pay, and this debt we have to pay is because of protecting them.
Right.
And just like today, there are going to be people who don't bother really investigating, really kind of researching and learning, and they'll say, well, he does have a point.
Right.
We did get protected. There were British soldiers over here. Well, yeah. But anyway, and so he saw that it was about more than a reaction to what a few guys in Boston, because if you read the thing, that's what they were saying. Well, a few guys in Boston, uh, you know, make trouble. That has nothing to do with us in Richmond or Williamsburg. Who cares?
But it
You know?
also takes like so much wisdom, because, to use another example today, there could be some that could use that same, I guess, argument and say, well, look what Russia is doing to Ukraine. They could do the same thing to us. Now, it doesn't take a whole lot of wisdom to see through that argument, but I think, like, it does take wisdom for Patrick Henry to say, wait a sec, this is different than, you know, um, than the English attacking French directly, for example, or for the English attacking Spain, or something like that. Like, this is different. This is actually affecting our homeland, and we need to understand and have the wisdom to know the difference between, when we should sue for peace and when we need to start turning our, you know plowshares into swords.
Yeah, and I mean, something little known to people that haven't really read there's several good biographies of Patrick Henry, but Patrick Henry opposed declaring independence at first, because in his mind he said, we're going to get walloped. He's like, we're not prepared for that yet. We need to prepare for this, right? But once it came time for the Virginia to send its instructions to the Second Continental Congress, he was all on board. But when it first started being mentioned, he was like, I don't think we're ready for that kind of step. You know, yes, we need to have armed resistance, but to declare war in that sense, to declare independence, we need to be prepared for that. But then once it got to that point, he obviously supported independence, and you know, became he was governor of Virginia, and he but that's the thing, he was a very savvy person, but I just love that what did Lord Byron, which is this is see people don't understand. Patrick Henry, Lord Byron calls him the forest-born Demosthenes. Like Lord Byron talks about Patrick Henry, calling him the forest-born Demosthenes. But now that will mean nothing to nobody today because nobody knows who Demosthenes is. And so it's like, I don't, that doesn't mean anything. But to someone who knows who Demosthenes is, that's such a huge, that's huge praise.
That's adoration, man. Yeah.
And that's who he was. He was a speaker that understood history, that could explain the application of it, and could get people fired up.
Oh, he moved people. Like
Oh, yeah.
the stories they talked about were, after that particular speech, he was walking out and people were just wanting to get near him and touch him, just as like say, we're with you. Let's do this thing. And what does he immediately do? He goes and he rounds up his militia and says, okay, we got to prepare. Let's get going.
Yeah, exactly. He was a guy who put his money where his mouth is every time that it came down to protecting liberty. I mean, he really did place he put his head in a noose, knowing, after the king's rebellion, after the king's act of rebellion, saying that proclamation of rebellion, saying that anybody who does anything even close to talking about armed resistance to the crown will be treated as a military prison. Will be treated as a what do you call it? Like an enemy combatant,
Right.
and hanged by the neck until dead, if caught. So all of those guys put their heads in a noose, right?
Yeah.
Every one of them.
Oh, and what a coup that would have been for the king to get Patrick Henry. Because like I said, he was the Winston Churchill. He was the guy that was like, that again, to go back to that speech, it like ran through all the colonies like wildfire.
Mm-hmm.
It was like John Locke's, what's the name of the pamphlet?
Essay on Human Understanding. Are you talking about two treatises on civil government?
Anyway, it doesn't matter. My point is, it went through like wildfire.
Oh, you mean Thomas Paine?
Thomas Paine. See,
yeah,
musician brain. Okay,
yeah, I got you. Yeah, Thomas Paine. Yeah, exactly.
But that was like, that's what happened. It just flew, and it was able to convince so many people, enough people. Let's just say that enough people to say, yeah, we need to do this thing.
Yeah, and that's what we need. We need people to recognize their role, and then to do that thing and do it consistently. We need people. We've got the situation now where everybody wants to be a general, and the suggestion that maybe you be a colonel instead of general, that just gets people upset today.
That's
that
so
hurts
powerful,
feelings, and I don't want to be subordinate to this guy. So in so many ways, we need Patrick Henry today.
Yeah.
In so many ways.
What your call is not necessarily to be the general, and maybe not even to be the colonel, but it's to be, the guy that's going to bring the troops in. Spoiler alert: the colonialists win.
Yeah, exactly.
They win, and I want to jump ahead to. Again, I think maybe, if I'm going to call Patrick Henry one of the most unheralded founding fathers, this is, I think, the most unheralded aspect of his just tremendous life. And that is his resistance both to the Constitution and to both before and after it was ratified. Like and you mentioned about it before, but what were maybe, first of all, from my understanding, he was invited to the Continental Congress in order to, and he just said, I smell a snake. This is
he said, I smell a rat. The official letter that he wrote to the council said that he couldn't afford to go financially. But the yeah, the truth is he would write and say, I smelled a rat at that convention. He's like, I know that there are people there that their goal is to create a consolidated central government. And he's like, we we can get what we need to have done through amending the Articles of Confederation. We don't need any. He's like, but I know there are people who are going there, particularly for the purpose of establishing an entirely new government.
So what were the things that needed to be changed in the Articles of Confederation, and then clearly that didn't happen. But like, what was the purpose of that Continental Congress officially,
Oh, of the convention, the
or the
Constitutional
convention?
Convention.
Excuse me. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
the convention.
well, officially, so the Congress, so Alexander Hamilton, shocker, makes a motion in Congress, in the Continental Congress. He makes a motion in the Confederation Congress. Sorry, he makes a motion to say we need to have a convention, a plenipotentiary, meaning all the power in this convention to fix the defects in the Articles of Confederation, or the Constitution as they called it, because it was the Constitution. And so he makes a motion, it ends up passing, and Congress says, okay, in May, and that was February of 1787. So they say in May, we invite all the states to send delegates to Philadelphia for the sole and express purpose of recommending revision to the Articles of Confederation. And then those recommendations will go to Congress and will go to the state governments. And if unanimously approved, they will become part of the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation. That was their only, so they could propose amendments to the Articles of Confederation. That was it. Sole and express authority. But that was gone day one. And so it ended up, they threw out the Articles of Confederation and created an entirely new government, exactly the way Patrick Henry warned, with a much stronger, what they call general, what we would call federal government. And he's right. You read there are very vague terms in there that we still argue about because they're so vague.
Right. And of
And
course, where there's vagueness, tyranny can just slip right in.
right. And even, but Alexander Hamilton himself says that. What is it? Federalist 82, 74. One of the ones he's like, you're going to give these people excuses. If you offer a Bill of Rights, he says, if you amend you'll have them amended out of existence because they will find excuses to take power where none was given. And that's essentially, but that also happened with the Constitution before it was amended. And Patrick Henry says, I mean, you got, if your listeners, viewers, if you guys want to have just one of those things this July 4th, beyond actually reading the Declaration of Independence, read the speeches given, it was in June of 1788. Read the speeches of Patrick Henry, George Mason, Edmund Randolph, James Madison, Richard Henry Lee. Read their speeches because, man, Patrick Henry, when he gets up, one of the first things he says is, who gave them the authority to write "We the People"? They had no authority to say the people do anything. He said these were state delegates. The states created this union. Who gave them? He's like, so from the jump, he's like, literally the first three words of this demonstrate the ultimate aim of its advocates, which is to obliterate state sovereignty, create a consolidated nation, right? And it just gets better from there. And then, of course, James Madison steps up and says, my honorable friend is, talking about things that are never going to happen.
That happened within 10 years.
Oh, I mean, yeah, easily.
Yeah.
The Alien and Sedition Act,
Right.
the Whiskey Rebellion.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The Whiskey Rebellion. We're talking George Washington, and we had blown through the Constitution.
Yep. Yep. I mean, it just absolutely any of those, just like Patrick Henry saying, wait a sec, if the king has the right to lower what Virginia deems necessary to pay preachers, that's going to lead to tyranny. He was the same guy, 20 what 20, 30 years later,
yeah,
saying, listen, if you can't see that this one statement, its ultimate goal is to create a to take away state rights, once again, that they will do it, he's exactly right. I mean, that guy, he understood how that works.
Yeah, I recently wrote an article called Clash of the Titans, talking about, and I give selections from the speeches given by Patrick Henry and James Madison, kind of, the responses to each other. But
Yeah.
it was Clash of the Titans, and you read the things that Patrick Henry said, and you're like, I don't, how, but he tells you, how is he so prophetic? He studied history. He says, I just look at the past, and if the same thing happens now that happened then, the same misfortunes will follow the same poor decisions.
Absolutely.
And that's what we have today.
So
And he's just an amazing guy doesn't get the credit he deserves. Really kind of placed on the JV squad.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for the pithy, give me liberty or give me death, I think he might be a name as forgotten as St. George Tucker or John Taylor of Caroline. He might be as forgotten as those guys.
Which would be an absolute shame. And it's a shame that we don't know those guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to finish up with your thoughts. Apparently, after his death, they found some writings that he had. And within it, he talks a little bit about the Stamp Act and what it led to, and that led to its independence. And then he finishes with this little line, and I love it so much because it's something that you and I talk about both privately and on the show, and within the great book club that you've organized for meditations. Anybody interested, hit us up. Like this book club is amazing and will change your life.
So good, yeah.
It is so good. But this is what he wrote. He said, whether this, being the independence of the nation, will prove a blessing or a curse will depend upon the use our people make of the blessing which a gracious God had bestowed upon us. If they are wise, they will be great and happy. If they are of a contrary character, they will be miserable. Righteousness alone can exalt them as a nation. Reader, whoever thou art, remember this, that in thy sphere practice virtue thyself and encourage it in others.
Yeah, I mean, he left that as literally his final message to the world. What else do you need to know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a message for today. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, even things like in thy sphere, right? In thy sphere, whatever you're called to do, whatever your position, you can be an example no matter who you are, where you are. In thy sphere, you can be an example. Like we talked about yesterday in book club, there's no excuse, regardless of everything, for you not to choose virtue. You are completely blameworthy when it comes to whether or not you're a virtuous person. And that, Patrick Henry's literally his last plea, is basically, we will not be free unless we are righteous.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
First of 23 installments requested by Dr. Levitt. Trying to be in compliance here because we're taking him and that whole organization down.